gang. I am Joe Edelman, and welcome to The Last Frame Live. Tonight, we're going to talk about perfectionism. Is it ruining your photography? Does a photo have to be perfect to be perfect? I promise I'll do a Q&A before we wrap up, so start typing. I'll do my best to answer all of your questions. If you're watching live, please leave me a note in the chat. Some of you have already started. Let me know who you are and where you're watching from. Already, I got Ty here in New Jersey. Alvin's here from Virginia. Cooley in Hobart, Indiana. Eric's hanging out down in Knoxville. Charlie's here from Mexico. I got Jim in Pasadena, Maryland. Let's see. We got Brenda here. I don't know where she's from. That's okay. Lynn in New York. Thank you. And if you're watching the replay, no worries. Drop a comment below the video so that I know you're here. All of you are part of a growing global community of photographers in over 100 countries who have been tuning in to watch The Last Frame every week. And for that, I'm going to work really hard to help you with your photography in the next 60 minutes. And you know the drill. It would help a lot more people find out about The Last Frame if you could do me a solid. Hit that thumbs up down below the video. The more thumbs up, the more YouTube recommends the show to other photographers. And of course, while you're down there, feel free to hit that share button. Let your photography friends know that we are streaming live on YouTube right now. Or you can go ahead and share this link that I just put into the chat there, lastframe.live. Okay, it's also in the show notes below the video. And of course, Twitter, Facebook, they are the fastest way for you to be able to get the word out. Okay? All right, so two quick reminders before we dig in tonight, right? There is still time to get your tickets for ClickCon. Let me just put that up on the screen. I know some of you are like, my gosh, I wish ClickCon would happen so he would stop talking about ClickCon, right? Hey, I'm honestly, sincerely excited about this. And it's not like I make any money if you sign up. So that's not the case. It's June 20th through the 23rd. It's just 12 days away. I'm going to be presenting 3 different programs on the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday that week. You can register at clickcon.us and make sure you use the discount code Edelman15. That gets you a 15% discount off of your ticket purchase. I'm going to put that in the chat for you. That too is down below the video. And no, that's not an affiliate link. I don't make any money. If you decide to go, you just get to attend a really, really awesome event with a great lineup of instructors, okay? Also, I've been talking a lot about the Tog Knowledge Learning Community, and I know some of you have not joined yet. You're going to regret that decision. You really are. This is your opportunity to get in on the ground floor of a new way of learning photography. And don't worry, there's no money involved. It doesn't cost anything. But it does require that you sincerely want to improve your photography. And you have to be willing to put some effort in to do that, right? Honestly, it's a one-of-a-kind learning destination for photographers. I will also share a unique invitation link in the chat for you. You can also find a link below the video. Make sure you read the sign-up page, watch the short video before you finish your sign-up, and enjoy the community. In photo news this week, heck, you know what? I'm not going to bore you with the photo news stuff, but I will tell you this. If you regularly visit the photo blogs, any of them, like Petapixel, any of those, fstoppers, DIYphotography.net, Photo Focus, you name it, okay? If you regularly visit them, you actually don't have to do that anymore. I'm not telling you shouldn't read their articles. You absolutely should. But members of my Tog Knowledge community have all of the photography news feeds from Petapixel, DIY Photography, fstoppers, Photo Focus, DP Review, SLR Lounge, PDN Online, and Pop Photo. And all of those articles appear in the Tog Knowledge community within minutes of publication. So there's no need for you to have to hop from site to site to be able to get your fix, right? So again, link is in the chat. It's also below the video, right? So this week we have an interesting topic. Does a picture have to be perfect to be perfect? So we're going to do a little phototherapy, if you will, all right? I mean, think about it. In photography, does perfect make perfect? If a photograph is technically perfect on all of the rule-abiding levels, does that make it a perfect photograph? Or is there another factor that creates perfection? I mean, how do you define perfection in photography? How important to you is perfection? And come on, let's face it, who gets to decide what is perfect and what isn't, right? So a few weeks back, a member of my Tog Knowledge learning community posted an image with a question. He asked, does a photo have to be perfect to be perfect? And then a follow-up question to that, he asked, have we become, as an industry or community, have we become more obsessed with the technicalities of photography than the art of it? My answer to those two questions, no for the first one, yes for the second one. A photo definitely does not have to be perfect to be perfect. So let's break that down and let's get past the wordplay, okay? If I can share a little bit of something about me, I am a perfectionist, hardcore. I want to be the best. I'm willing to put in the hard work. I am by nature very competitive, and I'm great at managing little details. But there's a big problem. I'm not the best photographer, and I never will be. I learned very early on in my career that I wasn't the best and that I honestly didn't have what it takes to be the best. I almost gave up on photography. I mean, what's the point, right? If I can't be the best, why should I work so hard at it? I shared those thoughts with my father as a teenager, young teenager. I was like 14 or 15 years old. And he asked me a straightforward question in response. He asked me why I picked up a camera in the first place. And what about the camera made me pick it up again and again and again? At that moment, I realized what was most important to me. It was the process of creating photos and the access that it gave me to all kinds of different people. Being the best was something the competitive side of me was pushing for, but it wasn't the reason that I enjoyed taking pictures. So as I grew up and I began working professionally, I continued to struggle with wanting to be perfect because it's just part of my DNA. And you see, the problem with wanting to be perfect, it creates anxiety, it creates stress. Perfectionists honestly become their own worst enemies. You know, good enough is never good enough. Perfectionists are impossibly tough on themselves, and they're tough on their inability to be perfect. Because anyone who's driven this way will eventually realize that you actually can't achieve true perfection. Once you realize that, it's not as freeing as you would think. It almost discourages you from picking up the camera in the first place because you know that there's going to be a lot of failure. And you know you will fail at being a perfectionist. And honestly, I would suggest, I don't have a statistic to back it up. It's just from my experience and the travel and the teaching and the amount of photographers that I talk to. I would suggest that most photographers actually struggle with this aspect of perfectionism. You may have heard me talk a little bit about this part in the past. I call it epic apathy. Now, full disclosure, you will not find this term in Google and any Google search or anything like that. It's, shall we say, a new term, okay? In fact, let me go back to this there. There we go. The definition of epic apathy, if you will. A condition that impacts the brain's motivational system, usually found in photographers who have spent more than $1,000 on camera gear. And interestingly enough, smartphone photographers seem to be immune from epic apathy. Epic apathy manifests itself in a sudden inability to make a photograph if the sufferer feels that the resulting image will be insufficiently epic and likely to collect too few social media likes. So, how do you know if you suffer from epic apathy? I can give you a great case example, which I think most of you will be able to relate to. If you've ever been out with your camera and, accessories, bag, whatever, but you saw something and you had that quick motivating thought of, oh, I should take a picture of that. And you reached for your camera. But while you were reaching for your camera, you had a second thought. And that second thought caused you to stop and not pick up the camera or to put it back in the bag. That second thought was something like, oh, but the light's not right, or I don't have a long enough lens, or I just don't have the right lens with me, or I don't have enough time. And as a result, you chose not to take a photo because it won't be epic. That is epic apathy. Any of that sound like you? You don't have to admit to it. Be honest with yourself, though. So I'm sorry to say, there is no simple cure for this problem, and I'm not going to give you a 3-step or a 5-step process to overcome the problem, because it really doesn't work like that. The good news is, it doesn't have to be a terminal diagnosis. Over time, my struggles with perfectionism and epic apathy led me to a solution that honestly is kind of counterintuitive, but it's very effective. The answer first was to allow myself to be a perfectionist, to remind myself that it's okay to want to do well, to strive to be perfect, because that's just how my mind's wired. The solution to the problem, though, came with developing a more realistic approach to perfectionism, a strategy that was not so self-defeating. So this new approach, it began with the understanding that if I ever did achieve true perfection, think about this. What would I do for an encore? How do you do better than perfect? So this solution also meant that I had to learn that it was okay to fail, something that you hear me talk about all the time. And that the important part was that if I didn't take the risk, there would be no chance of success, ever. So it also required one more thing. It required that I routinely ask myself my father's question. Why did I pick up the camera in the first place? You see, reminding myself of the answer to that question is what would help me shape and determine how perfect or how imperfect any of my photographs really are. It's the why. So that brings us back to the question, what makes a picture perfect? So in the years since that encounter with my father and him asking me that question, my career has gone from photojournalism to weddings and portraits and sports teams and product photography and food and fashion and beauty photography, back to photojournalism, and then back to beauty and portraits and fashion portraits. Yeah, I've done a little bit of everything. Still don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, but I've learned that a perfect picture is a picture that represents a moment that I care about. For it to be perfect, my photograph needs to make people pause. Hopefully, say, wow. I want to create a story with my lighting and my composition and the elements that I include in the photo. I want people to feel something when they look at my image. In short, a perfect image should evoke emotion. If we do a quick Google search, after the last frame, of course, search for the phrase iconic photographs and then click on the images tab. You will be presented with some of the most memorable images from history. Upon closer inspection, you will find that many of those photos suffer from poor quality. Oftentimes, they're not sharp. Oftentimes, there's frequently subject or camera motion. The composition is awkward. The exposure is off. And believe me, the list goes on and on and on. So how is it that these images are considered to be so good? The answer, they represent emotional moments. Heck, even some of Ansel Adams' images were not great exposures. For example, his famous moonrise over Hernandez was flat and uninteresting as he shot it. But Adams recognized the scene's potential, and he had very little time to set up his view camera and expose a sheet of film without being able to meter the scene. I mean, both Ansel Adams and Jerry Uelsmann were really the original Photoshop masters. Problem was, they didn't have Photoshop. They did their magic in a darkroom with paper and chemicals and light and meticulous note-taking. But they had the ability to turn the average into the incredible. Now, I'm not a landscape photographer, but I can't help look in awe at any of Ansel Adams' images. Edward Weston and Irving Penn, two photographers that history regards as masters, they routinely created art with awkward composition, and they printed their black and white images in ways that we would currently call flat and muddy and poor quality. Yet these images stand the test of time as incredible works of art because they evoke emotion. They did then, and they still do now. So, sounds kind of simple, right? Now, it almost makes it sound straightforward. A perfect picture evokes emotion. For me. Not entirely that simple, right? Because different people find different aspects or different genres of photography appealing to varying degrees, which is why photography is subjective. There is no easily defined answer to this question. If I can discuss a bit of human nature, in most countries, like here in the United States, we go through 12 or more years of schooling as we develop into adult human beings. While we're in school, almost everything has a right or a wrong answer. Almost everything is quantified by an A through F scale, right? And we all know that nobody wants the F. Heck, some people have a meltdown if they don't get an A+. So we're conditioned to want to be correct. Know the right answer, do things the right way. The only part that has right or wrong in photography is the physics part. Everything else is subjective. So it's hard to establish right or wrong or A or F. What makes a picture perfect is different for everyone. The simple reality is that no one will have the same experience with one of your photos that you did while making it. Even if they were standing next to you when you took the photo, their experience will differ from yours. The second question that was posted in my learning community, have we become more obsessed with the technicalities of photography than its art? I would argue in many ways, heck yeah. And that's not a good thing. I tend to call these photographers techtographers. Look, I'm not trying to make an insult here. It's just simply a label that represents photographers who cannot resist the urge to get the A, to be perfect in a defined, rule-abiding way. Yeah. Techtographers are the folks who follow all the rules, but in their defense, they find comfort in those rules. They oftentimes create images that, while they may be scientifically and technically perfect, because they followed all those rules, those images are also visually sterile and uninteresting. And once again, look, I'm not judging techtographers. In their defense, our general obsession with social media and sharing everything that we do makes it really hard to develop as a photographer in today's world. Think about it, right? I mean, ironically, we live in a time with all this incredible technology that allows us to do so much more with a camera than I certainly ever could have dreamed of as a teenager. Yet that same technology that is so amazing, it also preys on our fear and our anxieties, and it challenges even the most confident personalities. I mean, when I was developing my skills as a young photographer, back in the dark ages with film, right? I would take a photo, and frequently I would be the only person who would ever see that image. I found out pretty early on that my parents would never say bad things about my pictures, and that friends and relatives would usually behave the same way. Fortunately, my mentors, they were tough and honest, but always supportive and encouraging. And if I met someone who actually took the time to comment about one of my photos that they saw maybe in a newspaper or in a magazine, they were commenting to my face. So they had nowhere to hide. That meant that those kinds of interactions, even if they had feedback, were usually very positive as well. We all know that people forget that there's a person on the other end of that when they're typing, right? Today we take a picture and in no time it's online for the world to see. And then we quickly learn that the world is full of jerks. Jerks that don't consider us. They don't consider why we took the picture. They don't consider what is our level of experience. Or they don't consider any of the obstacles that we had to overcome to make that photograph. These jerks are simply full of opinions and hot air, and that never makes a person feel good about what they're doing or the progress they are making. You can post a photo and you can get 100 likes, but all it takes is that one jerk, one, who's going to recite some stupid, stuffy rule that he learned in a YouTube video like he is an expert about it. And then you immediately feel like crap, and it doesn't really matter how many likes you get at that point. Likes become the A. Positive comments are the A+. Not a lot of likes or a nasty comment equals the F. Even though the nasty comments frequently come from people who have much less talent than you have. If you remember my Facebook group or my Talk Knowledge Learning community, you already know that I don't believe in that kind of feedback. I don't allow it. It has absolutely no value, and it's pretty much guaranteed to stunt the growth of any developing photographer. I do believe that even though we have these incredible resources like YouTube and Google, it is much harder to develop as a photographer today because of the way we live our lives so publicly. So, in summary, what do I suggest? How do you handle this? I would start by encouraging all of you to remember my father's question, which was really his advice. Never forget the reason you picked up the camera in the first place. And look, that applies even if you're doing client work, with the exception, of course, that you have to satisfy the client. So your challenge is to find the right clients, right? But in addition to remembering that question, don't try to be the best. Do work hard. Do work very hard to be the best that you can be. Create and record moments with your camera and focus on the emotion of the shot in a way that satisfies you. Strive to have people look at your work and pause and consider it. And if you're like me, work for that wow response. And again, this is not an excuse to ignore really learning photography. Learning what depth of field is, how to control it, and use it creatively, and learning everything there is to know about things like the inverse square law. No, there's no passing on that. And this is also not an excuse to be a gear photographer who has all the newest, coolest gear but can't shoot. And it's definitely not an excuse to be a zombie photographer who shoots exactly what everybody else shoots. In fact, it's just the opposite. It is a suggestion to stop paying so much attention to what the next guy is doing. And be yourself. Do you. Be different. Do your own thing. Do be a perfectionist, but use it in a positive way. Don't let it prevent you from trying. Instead, focus on the details. I promise you, success in photography, it's not in rules, ever. It's in details. If you look back on those iconic photographs that I mentioned, the ones that have stood the test of time, they are strong on details. And they're flawed all at the same time. The flaws are forgiven because the images connect with the viewer and make you say, wow. And let's be honest, especially now in 2022, couldn't we all use a little bit more wow in our lives? Think about it. So don't worry about perfect. Keep the fun in your photography. And look, regardless if it's a hobby or if it's a profession, if you can keep the fun in the process, you'll never work at photography. You'll shoot more often, you'll improve with experience, and you'll always feel rewarded for your efforts. So I hope that gives you something to think about. I hope that that helps some of you. Where are we at? Yeah, this is good. We got a half an hour for questions, which I was hoping for. I'm going to scroll back here through the comments. I saw there were a few that came in while we were talking. I've also got a couple of little notes to share with you about some upcoming stuff. But seriously, if you have questions, you're here. How can I help you, right? So let me start from the end here. We'll move back up. Cloud Strife, that was me in EMS school. I had to be in control of everything, perfectly memorize everything, score 98th percentile and above every test. I brought a lot of that into photography when I started. Yep. And it ultimately, I mean, look, if you're a perfectionist, if that's part of your mindset, for any of you, it makes sense. It's logical because it's instinctive, right? So this is kind of one of those things where you have to override that instinct. And that's why my advice to you is embrace being a perfectionist. If you are that mindset, embrace being a perfectionist. But you've got to mix in some reality, right? The reality of it is you're never going to hit perfection. And legitimately, what the hell do you do for an encore if you do? So I like to look at the idea of being a perfectionist as what I tend to call for myself, I call it the art of perfectionism. So it's a working philosophy. It is that attention to details, right? And again, if you look at my photography, the thing I'm most proud of, I love it when people say, wow. I love it when people say, oh, you're so creative. But honestly, the thing I'm most proud of is you will never find something sloppy in my photographs, period. And if we're talking like messy hair, take a good look. I guarantee you it took at least 20 minutes to get it that kind of messy, right? So it's very intentional. So I just don't do sloppy. The details are spot on. And that alone, just that feature, elevates the perception of how good your photographs are. I don't care what genre of photography you shoot. It makes a huge difference, okay? Oh, Thomas Neal. Gosh, there's always one person that has to put this in. Thomas, I'm going to try and stay chill as I respond to this one, because this is one that honestly, it sets me over the edge. I'll be really honest. So sorry, gang. I'm committed. I'm not doing a rant tonight, okay? Thomas typed here. Let me put it on the screen so you can all see it. You've all heard it before. Learn the rules like a professional so that you can break them like an artist. Pablo Picasso. I actually think that whole concept gets quoted back to someone prior to Picasso, but it doesn't matter where it came from. Here's the thing, Thomas. And I know that quote's been around forever. I know that pretty much every member of every camera club in the world knows that quote and will recite that quote because it happens to me every single time I do a presentation for a camera club. Somebody steps up and puts that quote on the table. That quote is bullshit. You can quote me for tons of reasons. tons of reasons. The most important is, we'll start with science. Once the rules are in your brain, in other words, once you've learned them, as the quote proposes, they're there. Everything that you do in your art, in your life, to be creative, you are fighting against the human instinct to not work any harder than necessary. And you are fighting to get outside of that box that those rules create. So by learning the rules, you make things 10 times harder. Do your research, Thomas Neal, about the history of those rules and where they came from. And you're going to track them all the way back to the grandmaster artists, of which I love it when people tell me, well, Picasso. No, Picasso wasn't one of the grandmaster artists. Picasso's modern day. Go way back and learn about where the rules came from and how they came about. And you'll notice that the original guys, the Rembrandts, the Renoirs, all those people, they had no rules. Not at all. The rules were made because of them. And the rules created copies of them. And because they were copies, the perception is that the copies were pretty good. But a copy is never as good as the original. Rules simply kill creativity. Think about it, Thomas Neal and all the rest of you. When you're looking at pictures, or for that matter, when you go to the movies or turn on a TV show, the stuff that jumps out at you is, wow, that's creative. Correct me if I'm wrong. Overwhelming majority of the time, that is because you have never seen anything like it or never seen it done that way. If people follow the rules, that can never happen. The rules make things predictable. The rules make things obvious. The rules make things boring. So I will beg you, Thomas, sincerely, please never repeat that quote, and especially don't repeat that quote to a young photographer. You are doing more harm than good to a young photographer, especially since 20 and 30-year-olds and teenagers today learn very differently than my generation and the generation behind me learned. They learn very differently. That's a quote that needs to be banished to history, and it needs to not be repeated. That's not my opinion. I've given you facts and I've given you science behind it. So you might be able to figure out I'm passionate about my belief in that. Okay. Scrolling on up here, Roman, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Indeed it is. Here's your useless knowledge tidbit for the day. That quote was first recorded in 1942 by an author named Margaret Wolfe Hungerford. Wonder how many of you actually knew that piece. Let's see. Thomas Neal, when my model looks at the shot in the back of the camera and says, oh, wow, that's a perfect image. Yes, except I never let my models look at a shot on the back of the camera. That's a different conversation. We won't have that. I've already been tough on you. But yes, I certainly want my models to say, wow, when they see an image. Okay. Let's see. Alvin here. Gosh, that one's a hard one for me. Wabi Sabi is my new way because for many of my years of my life, I needed perfection, which killed my creativity in all walks of life, but it also killed my photography. Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of being perfect is brutal if you let it rule your decisions and if you allow it to make you second guess your work, right? So it's about finding that balance, Alvin, okay? Cloud Strife, you're describing me. Honestly, Cloud Strife, I think I described most of the people that are here. It's just that not everybody's willing to admit to it. Let's see here. Cloud Strife also had another question. I have a question regarding the inverse square article you wrote. I didn't fully understand. Don't worry, you're not the first person, okay? Every 4 feet from the egg, you would lose 2 times the power. So if I add a string of 10 feet to my stand, is that close enough, or would it be more helpful to have an 8-foot string? If you're talking about doing the egg exercise that I do in the inverse square law video, just for the sake of kind of being able to experience and see it happen, either would work fine. The ultimate if I could tell you, this is how I want to see you learn it, Cloud Strife, you would do that exercise, and to do it with an 8-foot string is absolutely fine. But then you're going to take what you see while doing that in your results, and then maybe work with a mannequin, or maybe work with a person, or it could be a book sitting on a table, right? And then don't worry quite so much about the exact distances, but then understand that, okay, the closer I put that light source, the faster the light's going to fall off from front to back on the subject. And that even with the idea that if you have a bigger modifier, it gives you softer light, there's a point of no return. There's a tipping point. If I get that big modifier close enough to my subject, the light starts to get harsher and harsher and harsher and harsher. Doesn't matter how big the modifier is, right? So ultimately, what you're looking to gain in learning about the inverse square law, and I always tell people, honestly, if you asked me right now, Joe, can you give us the equation for the inverse square law? No, I have no freaking idea. And I don't care. I'd have to go look it up. And even then, I gave up on math when they started introducing the alphabet and squiggly lines. I just did. I'm not proud of that, but I did, right? So I couldn't even probably read that equation properly. But if I was going to demonstrate the inverse square law to you and all the different ways it could be used and what it does and how it impacts different types of photography, I could spend the next 3 hours and we'd still run out of time before I got to the end of everything that I could show you, right? So that's kind of building up the experience piece of it. The more experiences that you can build up, and even, let me add a word to that, the more experiences that you can build up from a practice standpoint, each one of those experiences where you figured out, ooh, if I do this, that's going to happen. If I do that, that's going to happen. They become tools. They become tools in your creative toolkit. They become depth of understanding for lighting in general, but they become tools in your creative toolkit. As an example, well, you know, I only have a big umbrella, but I want to get light that looks a little bit more like a beauty dish. And I don't have $200 or $300 to spend to buy a beauty dish. The fact of the matter is, as I proved to all of you on YouTube, you don't need $200 or $300 to buy a beauty dish. You can use an umbrella. You're just going to bring it past the point of no return, and you will be able to replicate the exact same light fall off that you get with a very expensive beauty dish. In that video that I'm talking about, in fact, here, let me go ahead and find you guys the video. Let's see, and I'll share the link here. The umbrella that I used in this video, I got for $6 on clearance from Photoflex. So, you know, it doesn't need to be a super expensive umbrella is the point. My go-to, I just put the link in the chat for you there. My go-to umbrellas at this point that I travel with are the collapsible ones that fold up super short from Westcott. They're like the cheapest product that Westcott sells. They're only like $21. And they're shoot-through translucents. They work great, okay? Let's see what else we had here. I missed one from Eric before I go too far. Eric, oh, and as you know, I did the whole gear thing for 60 months, indeed. But yes, you've gotten to the other side of that, so that's good. Dan, who needs, whoops, here, let's switch that back so you guys can actually read. Who needs a college degree when so many skills are from practical skills and practice? You know, Dan, honestly, I am of the mindset, now, full disclosure, right? I didn't go to college. So, you know, you could argue that I am, you know, a little, gosh, I'm not even getting the right word now. But and my point is this, you don't need a college degree to be a great photographer. And most of, not all, most of the great photographers working today that have college degrees, their degrees weren't actually in photography. Most college photography degrees are going to take you in one of two directions. Most, not all. They're either going to take you in a fine art direction, which is all about them rules, which means you're just going to be spitting out crap. It'll be technically well done, but it's crap. So that statement there gets me in trouble every time I make it. My wife is a college professor. There are a few MFAs at her college to teach photography. They're not big fans of mine. Shocker. I'm not fans of theirs and what they teach either. It's worthless. But the other side is you wind up with a very technical education, like a school like RIT, for instance. Top-notch, top-drawer education, but it's going to be very technical. So it really depends on what you want out of photography. If you're looking to do any of the kind of work that I usually wind up talking about, portraits, weddings, any of that kind of stuff, even commercial advertising work, I would say that you're better off actually going to college as a business major and taking photography as a minor and still shooting tons. The one exception in that might be on the commercial side. Having a degree from RIT would certainly not hurt you as a commercial photographer. It would benefit you in that regard, okay? Let's see, Mitch. It used to bother me that my favorite images were underappreciated by others while my lesser shots got a better reaction. Oh, absolutely. A lesson I took from you was that no one else would have the same experience with each image that I had. That helped me let go of a lot of perfectionism, as my idea of what is perfect won't be shared by others anyway. Yeah, and you know, that manifests itself in so many different ways. One of the examples I like to give, you know, my wife and I, we are kind of polar opposite people. She's a college professor. She's a PhD. She is a college professor, right? I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. But I can be sitting here in my office working on a picture, and I am stoked about this picture. Everything I planned, it's better than what I planned. I am so thrilled. I can't wait to get it out on social media and to show it off. And she'll walk into my office and I'll be like, hey, what do you think of this? And I get the supportive, I mean, very supportive, but I get the supportive, oh, it's very nice. Which is like, you know, there's no wow. There's no, oh my God. It's just, she's being supportive. And then a week later, I'll be working on an image that it's okay, but I didn't quite hit the mark at the level that I would want to hit it at, okay? But I need to finish the image. I need to, you know, deliver to the model, to the makeup artist, whatever. But I'm ultimately, it's not an image that's going to wind up in my portfolio, but I'm working through it. And my wife will walk into my office and look over my shoulder and be like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, I love that colors and this, and then she'll start picking all these elements of the picture that are so incredible. And of course, I'm sitting there like, what the heck? Like, this image bombed for me, right? So it is. It's just one of those things. No other person is going to have that same experience. And at the end of the day, I don't care whether you're shooting for fun or you're shooting for profit. If you can't make yourself happy with the work that you're doing, you're not going to make anyone else happy. You're just not, right? So, Cloud Strife, my girlfriend and I have degrees that we don't use, just a lot of debt left over. Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, that's the case for a lot of people. We kind of, at least here in the US especially, we just have this attitude that we teach to kids like, you're going to go to college. So college has just become an extension of grade school, unfortunately, and it's not really preparing people for the future. And the reality of it is so many people, in this country at least, go to liberal arts colleges, and they don't really understand that a liberal arts college has no real concerns about you being prepared for a job. Their goal is to make you a better, more well-rounded human being. That is the liberal arts college. It's a university that is going to focus classes on career path, etc. So that unfortunately leaves a lot of people coming out, you know, of schools where they realize they don't really have the information and the experience that they should have been gaining in college to follow the career path that they want. Not to mention that a lot of people graduating college today still haven't figured out what they want to do. And that's not bad. They're not stupid. They're not lazy. But again, the world is changing. It's taking people a little bit longer to figure that out in life. And the system's not changing with it. So yeah, that's a problem, you know, that we have in that regard. So I think, guys, we're like 15 minutes early here, and I think I've gotten everybody's post. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to abandon the chat for a minute, and I just want to share a couple of other things with you really quick, okay? So on my website, and this is a couple of weeks away, but I'm going to let you know about it now, right? If you check out the presentations page that's on my website, you can also find the links to ClickCon, etc. But June 28th, right here, I have a free webinar that a lot of you could benefit from, actually. It's called The Secret Powers of raw files. And again, free. Basically, this is my workflow for how I develop my images. So this is not about retouching. I am doing a retouching class this fall. That's down the road. This is the developing portion. This is taking the raw file and how I develop it. In this presentation, I will be working in Adobe Camera Raw for the developing. But if you use Adobe Lightroom, it's the exact same piece of software. It just looks different, but it's the same thing, same settings, all of it. It doesn't matter if you use Luminar. It could be Luminar 4 or Neo. It doesn't matter if you use Affinity. It doesn't matter if you use DxO or Capture One. All of those basically do the same things when it comes to raw processing. Programs like Capture One have a few extra features, those types of things, but essentially they all do the same things. Affinity and DxO sometimes use slightly different naming labels for their settings, but it's all the same things. And really my goal in this presentation is to make sure that you walk away with a couple of pieces of information. Number one, how important it is to have a workflow. When you hear the word workflow, think of it as system. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And by no means am I creating a system to take creativity out of the process. Oh, no, no, no. The system is what allows me to add more creativity in and still have great quality in my images, because the system is the stuff that I'm going to make sure that I look at and touch and consider on every single image, and I'm never going to forget it, right? So I'll also do a breakdown of the various sliders, especially exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. Now remember, when it comes to processing in any of those programs that I mentioned, there's like 50 ways to do almost anything, right? So there's no one correct way. However, I find that a lot of photographers, especially new photographers, don't really understand what's happening when they use the sliders like the exposure slider and the contrast slider. And so as a result, they do use those two sliders, and then they avoid highlights and shadows and whites and blacks. So just to give you a hint, 99.9% of the time, I would never, ever touch the contrast slider, ever. Probably 80% of the time, I never touch the exposure slider. I do my processing through highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. And by the way, I also make sure that my images are properly exposed. So if you're one of these people that is frequently trying to fix images that are like 2 or 3 stops underexposed, 2 or 3 stops overexposed, that's another problem that you need to be working on fixing. Just is. Especially if you shoot mirrorless. My God, there's no excuse. There's just no excuse. Because you saw the finished image when you took the picture, before you took the picture. So you shouldn't be overexposing and underexposing. But the Secret Powers of Raw Files is designed to really teach you the idea of a workflow, show you more effective ways than taking the shortest, easiest routes so that you're going to get better quality out of your images. And also shows you some of the cool little tricks that you can do with raw processing that actually don't require you having to go into Photoshop and do more advanced things. The raw generators in pretty much every one of these programs are extremely powerful. A lot of really cool stuff that you can do with them. So that's what we'll be breaking down there. And actually, let me just go back here. If I hit back on that, the other free ones that are coming up, July 12th, Practical Composition, creating great images without the rules. There will be none of that rule of thirds or Fibonacci spiral crap in that conversation. It is truly a very practical approach. August 9th, Social Media for Photographers. August 23rd, Introduction to Portrait Photography. These are all free, the ones that I'm mentioning, okay? Let's see, September, oh no, that's not the free ones. I will give you guys another little tip. I don't post this online, but you should always check if you're interested. A lot of the virtual presentations that I'm doing for different camera clubs, like on July 19th, I'm doing a camera club presentation virtually for the Pocono Photo Club. A lot of these clubs do allow you to attend their virtual meetings, even if you are not a member. Or sometimes they'll allow you to attend 1 or 2 meetings before you have to pay to become a member. So, and this is not just for me, this is in general. Anytime that you see a camera club, they could be halfway across the world. If they're hosting a virtual presentation and if their policy is to allow outsiders to come in, you can take advantage of that. You don't have to be a member of the club. They'll explain it on their websites. And if you can't find any information on their website and you're not sure, because camera club websites are not always the best put together websites, there will always be a contact email on the website. Send them an email and ask them what their policy is and ask them if you can attend. But I will tell you straight up that frequently camera clubs do allow non-members to attend the program. So just ask if it's something that you would really like to see, okay? So you know I'm going to be in Chicago the end of the month, and then September 1st, I'll be down in Houston. I'm doing 1 day in Houston at the Houston Camera Exchange, and I've never been there before, so I'm looking forward to getting there. I'm going to be there for Tamron. So this will be the first teaching event that I'm doing for Tamron. I'm not sponsored by Tamron, but I am, of course, using Tamron lenses, and I'm going to do some education for them. So I will be there that evening. We're going to do a fashion portraiture workshop. So it will be a hands-on workshop. You will have the opportunity to come in and shoot, photograph the models, and create. So that's going to be a lot of fun here. So Katala, they do. I saw John P. Okay, cool. So yeah, if they are you talking about Poconos, or are you saying in general that they do? I'm sorry. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. Okay. So any other questions, gang? I'm going to wrap up a couple minutes early here if you guys don't have any other questions. But if you have questions, I will gladly answer them. I've shared everything that I had to share with you tonight. I do hope, in all sincerity, that you will consider the topic that we talked about tonight for a couple of reasons, right? One of the lines in there that was very short, very quick, and yet very important. So meaning I maybe should have spent a little bit more time with it. None of tonight's conversation was an excuse for bad photography. None of tonight's conversation was an excuse for being lazy. None of tonight's conversation was an excuse for not learning foundational skills. The bottom line is, if you want to improve your photography, you can't be lazy, you can't not care, and you have to learn the foundational pieces. Otherwise, you will not build skills, right? So this is really addressing the people that, regardless of where they are in the learning curve, struggle with perfectionism and find it to be self-defeating. So that's really what we're dealing with here. And I will tell you this, even if you do not consider yourself a perfectionist, if you find yourself being passionate about photography, maybe you're not now, maybe down the road, but if you find yourself being passionate about photography, and if you find yourself really becoming passionate about improving, you're going to learn what that whole perfectionism thing is all about. You really will. So I promise you, this is advice that will help you in the process, but it is never an excuse. And we talked about excuses the other week, right? So it's never an excuse for bad photography. It's simply a matter of understanding that, yes, you got to put in a little bit of effort to keep the two things separate and deal with them independently. Okay? All right, gang. So I'm going to wrap up. I appreciate you all coming out tonight and listening. For those of you who are in the Midwest and are going to be at ClickCon, I am looking forward to seeing all of you in person. I will hope to see those of you who have not made it into the Photog Knowledge community yet. Hope to see you there soon. Again, it's free. Check it out, okay? And we'll be back next week. I will be here next week. The following week, I'm going to take a week off because I'll be in Chicago. But next week, we will be back again. Look for my social posts for the topic. All right, gang? Have a great time. Thanks for coming out. Go pick up your camera and shoot something, because your best shot, it's your next shot. Adios.